Moving on, Derek Benningfield. What are you doing on time? Not bad. Hi, Bill. 2017 marks the 150th anniversary of Canadian Confederation, July 1st, 1867, as well as the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, April 9th, 1917, where the Canadian national identity was forged and cemented. In honor of this, and he spelled it Honour, so you know he must be an actual Canadian. What are some of your favorite examples of our Canadian-American friendship and cooperation, militarily or otherwise? It's fun to make jokes about Canada because Canada makes so many jokes about. Nightfield, thank you very much, Foghorn. Because Canada makes so many jokes about us, and the jokes that Americans and Canadians make about each other are the jokes that family members make about each other. The U.S.-Canadian border is the without question, and nothing comes close to this. Nothing in the history of the world comes close to this. There have never been two countries that have shared a border of that length that have been that sympathetic to each other, that have been that much on the same side. You really did get the roommate of the century when you end up with Canada or the United States. And like brothers, they have different personalities. You know, the United States is loud and a little brassy and, kind of alpha. And, we go around in bars and we're a little loud and we're, driving fast cars and all the rest. And the Canadian identity is a little different. They're descended from people who thought being under King George was not such a bad idea. So I really do believe that on some level, there are genetic components for risk-taking and rebelliousness and all the rest. So I suspect that at the time of the revolution, if you were one of these lunatic revolutionaries, American patriots running around with your hair on fire and setting up liberty poles and talking about a constitution, well, that's a certain kind of person. Another kind of person, a very stable, very conservative in the good sense of the word, a very solid, prudent person, might look at this as a very bad idea, and you might want to migrate to a place where King George is in fact still the king. And I think that's the fundamental difference between Americans and Canadians. It's our backgrounds. We're born out of rebellion. The Canadians are born out of loyalty. And neither one of those two is neither here nor there. Although rebellion is much, much better. So there is a big difference in our national attitudes, but that difference is a patina on top of cultural similarities that are so strong that you actually cannot really, it's almost impossible to call them two different countries. I'm not aware of this ever having happened in history of the world, where people of two prosperous nations can go someplace and have most people not be able to tell them apart. Apparently, there are some Canadian actors on our television screens. As a matter of fact, I may have one of them in my office here, and so it's a very, very good mix. Now, as far as the war is concerned and everything, look. The debt that the United States owes Canada is a very big one, and it's not just for things like Vimy Ridge and so on. It's the debt that you owe a good neighbor, right? It's a debt that you owe somebody who takes care of the hedges and mows the lawn. In fact, does a better job of mowing the lawn than you do. The value of a good neighbor is virtually priceless. So there's that. But up until very recently, Derek, up until very recently, the most remarkable thing about Canada was how it punched above its weight militarily for 100 years. Well, not quite 100 years. Canada, with a much, much, much smaller population than the U.S., would send troops of the highest quality to World War I, World War II, Passchendaele, everywhere. And the Canadians were everywhere, and they were top quality. And they were, as I say, punching above their weight. My understanding is that at some point in history, it might have been right after World War II, maybe right before, that the Canadian Navy was the fourth largest in the world. That's quite remarkable, really. But somewhere in the last 40 or 50 years, that has changed. And now I think the Canadian Navy has two ships, and I'm not joking. I think it's really down to something like that. It's a little hard to watch because all of that courage and all of that elan seems to be replaced by, a lot of this socialist kind of big state free health care, which isn't free kind of thing. So it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to watch. Now there is very famously, I forget what the town was. It probably was. Let's just say it was Toronto. And somebody was joking that the height of the Cold War, that the best defense that the Canadians could come up with would be to have on the top of every building in Toronto, have it painted white with big black arrows that say New York this way and Detroit that way and Chicago this way, and that's pretty much it. But no, it's Canada is a lot like my fiance's birthplace, which is Siberia, and that is, it is so unimaginably vast. It's so vast that you can't conceive of it. The forests, like the taiga in Russia, go on forever and ever and ever, and virtually everybody lives very, very close to the United States. So we have our ups and downs, and we have our back and forth. And we all know what the Canadians joke about Americans is, how loud we are and fat and stupid and noisy and run around, break things and so on. But I'm going to tell you this as a friend, because Canada's the best friend this country's ever had, and continues to be so. It is the longest undefended border in history, and it's a miracle. But for those of you who may have Canadian friends, if you really want to stick a Canadian, if you're really getting a lot of grief from one of them, either good-naturedly or not, if you really want to stick them, here's how you do it. I was in where was it? Oh, come on. I cannot remember the name of this town. Ottawa. And I was talking with somebody. We were at a conservative event, and we're just kind of hanging around. And this person said, we have a show here in Canada, and the show is we take a Canadian host down to America, and we ask them questions about simple things like, does Canada have, indoor plumbing or something? And the reaction of the Americans is so funny, because Americans are so stupid when it comes to Canada that we just actually have a lot of fun watching Americans, flail about in their ignorance. My feed just kind of stopped here, right in the middle of a great joke. What happened? I'm going to refresh. Hang on. Don't lose that thought. Don't lose that thought. It's just important that I make sure we're still going out live and everything's looking cool and cozy. Come on, baby. Come on, talk to Daddy. There we go. Okay, so they talked about this show where Canadian goes down there and they get Americans on camera, and all of Canada just laughs uproariously at how naive and ignorant and stupid Americans are. And if you really want to get a Canadian back, you do what I did, which is immediately say, well, it sounds kind of fun, sounds interesting to watch. Do you know what shows we have on? Did you ever hear about the show we have on about Canada? He said, no. I said, of course you didn't. We don't have any shows about Canada. And that's all you have to say, right? That's it. Then they're done. They're finished. It's over. The Canadian identity is becoming more and more and more. Here's where we're not Americans. And when your entire national identity is a healthcare system, you've fallen a pretty long way from where you were at Vimy Ridge. Now, so is everybody else, right? Derek, I'd love to tell you that, it's been tough watching Canada kind of degrade and decay a little bit while we stay here in America, the fortress on the hill. But you want to talk about moral degeneration, you'd have to go to another country to come here and see the exact same thing. So it's something we should be fighting together. But in any event, things like, remember the Iranian hostage crisis where they the Canadian embassy smuggled out Americans? We see that kind of thing all the time. Canadian snipers in Afghanistan, I'm sure Afghanistan, maybe not Iraq, but they're fighting incredibly sophisticated warriors, but there are fewer and fewer of them. So these are trends that we should probably just try to reverse, just in general. But anyway, On behalf of the United States of America, I would like to say thank you for all of our Canadian friends. I mean this sincerely. I'm not going to put any jokes on this. This is a joke, but it's a good-natured joke. I did my introduction, or maybe it was my close when I was up in Ottawa, and I said, so here's to the United States and to its neighbor to the north, Canada. And our geographical relationship is actually really quite good. Canada gives Americans something to look up to, and much, much more importantly, America gives Canadians something to look down upon. And everybody laughed because we all know it's true. So, yes, the polite brother, the good brother, the role-playing brother has a quality all their own, and they're certainly a lot less difficult to live with than the loud, rambunctious, crazed, violent, gun-toting, murderous lunatics who have been to the moon 6 times. And we're heading for a 7.